Hello, and welcome to our new show here on the YouTube channel for Lower Merion Baptist Church. It's called Getting to Know Lower Merion Baptist. And today's guest is a very special one, Miss Jessy Beren, who's here to share some of her testimony and some of her story with us as we begin this new conversational ministry here at LMBC. I'd like to welcome Miss Jessy. Miss Jessy, welcome to our show today.
Thank you for having me.
So it's always good to see you. It's been a while.
It's been a while. We have to get back.
Yes, this COVID thing has really forced us to do new, interesting things and to start new ministries like this conversational ministry. But I praise God I thank you also for your support and your continued presence, even though it might not be physical. We talk often, and she's often on Zoom when we did our Bible studies, which will start again in August. So welcome.
Thank you.
And I want to say, how are you doing?
I'm doing perfect.
You're doing perfect.
I'm doing perfect. What can be better than that?
That I don't know. And so I'm glad you're here because I wanted to, and we talked a little bit earlier, I want to give you the opportunity to share some of your story. So let's start from the beginning. Where are you from?
I'm originally from Philadelphia, and my parents are immigrants. My father came from Scotland, and my mother came from England. And when they came in, we settled in Philadelphia in the Kensington section. And this was back in the late 50s and so on. And Kensington early 50s, I'm sorry, at that time was mostly Scottish, Irish, English people. My father being very big in soccer. He was a coach at the Lighthouse Field. And so our lives settled around the British groups in Kensington and Philadelphia, which at the time was mostly woolen mills and so on at that time. We were a divided house. My father and my sister, Irene, who was 13 years older than me, they went to Simpson Memorial Methodist Church, and they were very active there. My mother and me and Auntie. Auntie was the lady who raised my mother, and she was my mother's aunt, but she was like a grandmother. Well, we went to the Kensington Gospel Tabernacle. Don't ask me why, but that's how it was. Looking back, the tabernacle was, today I would say it was more evangelical. Where Simpson was a big Methodist church on Kensington Avenue. The tabernacle used to have what they called cottage meetings for children. Ooh. And it would be at somebody's house. And the lady's house was somebody by the name, there were two ladies, spinster ladies, that lived together. One was Miss Hershey and one was Miss Clinton. And they lived in a little row house in Kensington. I don't even know how I got there because we never had cars or whatever. I guess somebody walked me to this. And there would be lots of children. And they would have flannel graph in there, and we'd have a Bible lesson, and if Noah's Ark would be on, and it was really interesting, because they would tell the story and so on.
It was very visual.
It was visual. And then afterwards, we always had treats. And in the winter, it would be hot chocolate or something, So I think some of the neighborhood kids would come for the goodies. But we had to sit and listen to the story and watch the flannel graph and whatever the story was, if it was Moses and the bulrushes, or it was always some biblical story. And I think there was my first, and I had to be about 7 or 8 years old. My father died when I was 8. So I think it was there that my first recollection was about Jesus, because they sat you down and they wanted you to have him as your Lord and Savior, and you better listen, So I think that was my first introduction to that whole premise. When I would get home, Auntie, who was from England, her dad was a Methodist minister in Dewsbury, England. So she was very astute. We didn't have television. And she would read her Bible every night and pray. And I slept in the same room with Auntie. And she would pray every night. And she was totally, totally convinced that she wasn't going to die because she was going to be here when he came. And he was going to take, and I was convinced too, because this is what she told me.
She really believed it.
She believed it with her whole heart, that he was coming and she would be taken up. And this was, and we never had television, but we had a radio, and she would listen to, she was 85 at that time. She died when she was 94. But I never knew her as a young person. You know, she was always an old lady. And she would say, you know, if I die, Jessy, my teeth are in the cigar box at the top of the closet. If she died, she'd got laid out. If that happened, she wanted her teeth in. And I'd think about those teeth up in the closet, you know, that I was going to be the one to have to put her teeth in. But she died when I was in 6th grade. But she was very, she used to listen to Church of the Open Door on the radio, write stuff down, and when they would sing the hymns, she would sing along. And I'd be laying in bed listening to this, you know, going on, you know, and so on. Well, when I got to be a little older, after my father died, and we moved to Frankfurt, I got to be very involved with the Salvation Army because they had a community center. So when I got into the Salvation Army, whoa, now, talk about informal.
Yes, it was.
You know what I mean? It was Methodist doctrine. The doctrine at the Salvation Army was Methodist. It was still a Methodist doctrine because we didn't do communion as such, but we would rededicate ourselves all the time, you know. In other words, you could fall out of grace. That's, you know, there's questions there. But it was a much more informal kind of thing. And the premise there was always to help people. You can't pull people into church that are willing to be there. You want to go out and get them. So the Salvation Army's premise was open air at that time.
Yes.
You don't hear it now. But back then, every Sunday night we had open air at 6 o'clock. We'd go up Frankfurt Avenue and we'd have a little service, and people would stand there and listen. And that was that was their idea. Get people that need it on the street. Because the people who need it, that are coming, don't need it as much as the ones on the street.
Well, when we read the Gospels, Jesus didn't wait in a church.
No,
or in
he went out.
He went out.
And that was the Salvation Army. So being in the community center was all fun. It was ping pong, and we used to have fellas come on a Tuesday night, and they would come from Philadelphia College of the Bible. And they would have Bible lessons and Bible drills, and there again, it was fun. You know, it was, and there was a lot of kids in the community center. Some of them came to the church and some didn't. But I got very involved in the church. And there was a man by the name of Dad Reese who would teach all of the kids how to play instruments. So he decided I should learn the alto horn, E-flat alto horn. And there was a fellow by the name of Pat McGonigal. He was trombone. We had numerous cornet players, a couple kids that played the cornet. And the officers' children at that time we had some officers that had children, and they played. So we would practice, you know, Dad Reese would give us lessons. I thought he was a very old man. He was probably 50, you know, at the thinking
Well, you were what, 13, 14?
12 maybe, you know, and 11 maybe, I don't even know. Well, we would all play. Well, this one Sunday, guess what? The little band was going to play at the church service. Well, we were just happy as larks. And the tune that we practiced over and over was Duke Street. But that wasn't the hymn. I don't know what they were singing. I just knew I had to play Duke Street. So, you know, when I look back, there were people in the Salvation Army that really catered to the children. There's a lady by the name of Ethel Hawes, and she said to me, I will buy you a uniform if you want it. And I couldn't let her do it. They were $30. But that was a lot of money.
That was, back then, that was...
And I knew Ethel was, well, she was a single lady, and she worked at Roman Haas, which was right there in Frankfurt at the time. And so she, I thought, well, I'll save up, And then when Christmas came, we would be on the kettles, at Christmas time. And
you'd be ringing the bell?
No, we didn't ring bells, honey. No. So we were outside of an ice cream kind of place. We first started out, I had learned on my little alto horn all of the Christmas, not all of them, but several Christmas tunes. And I just played over on the horn.
See that.
We had a little podium kind of thing. Well, it got so cold, your fingers, Well, the ladies in the ice cream place would bring me out hot chocolate, every once in a while. And then you would get relieved after 4 or 5 hours of this. And I made money, 50 cents an hour.
Wow.
That was a lot of money.
It is a lot of money.
And of course the ladies would bring me out my hot chocolate, to the poor little Salvation Army girl, that's freezing outside.
So your foundational spiritual, getting to know God years were as a child and as a teenager, early teens, were at the Gospel Tabernacle and the Salvation Army. Working towards something. And then you wound up here at Baptist Church, but we'll talk about that later on. But.
Okay, we can spread out to the Baptist Church. Also in Frankfurt, on the other side of the avenue, was Frankfurt Baptist Church.
Oh, wow.
Now, Frankfurt Baptist Church had the very best summer Bible school. So the kids in the neighborhood, we all went to Frankfurt Baptist for Bible school because they made the best crafts.
Nice.
I mean, we're kids.
Yeah.
They had the best crafts. We made pot holders. It was the greatest thing. And we had lessons. We had the Bible class, and we studied the prophets, and we would do the different things. And one time they had us all dressing up, and we had, but they had the best Bible school. So every summer, we looked forward to going to Frankfurt Baptist Church for their Bible school. And they really did have a very good Bible school at that time.
And so this is also a reminder for us all that children are vital.
They are absolutely vital.
And that's why it's important to remember that the children aren't just the future of the church. They're the present. And all of these different lessons, you were able to pick up these different things from these different places and help you build this foundation and this relationship.
And it just doesn't leave you.
No.
It's there.
Yeah.
You remember all this stuff, So it's a very, when I look back, a very good foundation. I mean, I had Methodists, I had Salvation Army, I had all of this, I had the Baptists. And I took with it, because we were poor. I mean, we didn't have anything. My mother, there was nothing, hardly. And so I never did without, because I had all this friendship. And
not to mention the Catholic churches that played a vital role in your neighborhoods also.
Absolutely.
So you were kind of getting a little bit of everything.
Everything.
Building up this,
I went to catechism. When we got older, my dearest friend, who I would say was a devout Catholic, Thomasina, her husband-to-be was in the service. So the two of us, I had a 52 Buick, if you can imagine. It was like a tank, and it was the color of a tank. And I learned to drive that. And
if you can drive that, you can drive anything.
That's how I always felt. I could drive anything. But not really, because I never learned to drive a stick, believe it or not. But anyway, at the time I had the car. And she had to go, they were going to get married, and she had to go to pre-caning classes and for 6 weeks. So she asked me if I would come with her. Of course, I would. I was her girlfriend. So I learned a lot in those pre-caning classes about a lot of, I think it's a very good thing for any church to have that kind of thing for newly married, because they covered budget, which I thought, of course they covered the sacraments, which I learned what the Catholic sacraments are. They covered the sacraments, and why you're getting married. They covered birth control. They covered, you name it, they covered it in these classes. And it was a big group of people. And at the last day, you were allowed to ask questions. They had a doctor there and the priest. And it got a little hairy, you know, some of the questions were like scary for us, you know. But I went with her, so I did experience that part of it.
Wow.
And when I was going back into Kensington, my friends that were Catholic, that went to public school, had to go to a catechism class. So I went to the catechism class. But the nuns sat me in the back, because I was a Protestant.
Yes.
The nuns sat and gave me construction paper, and I would be coloring, but I was hearing all this stuff. And I used to call it constructions. Oh, they're going to constructions. It was called instructions at the time. But I used to say they're going to constructions because I had construction paper. And so. But the funny part about it is, when they would be walking, we'd be walking to this church. What was it called? Visitation. When we'd be walking to this church, they'd be practicing the Hail Marys, and I knew it better than them because I didn't have to worry about it. So I would be quizzing them on the, you know, Hail Mary, the Hail Mary and all that stuff.
But now these are your formative years. But now you move into what I called your rebellion. But you straightened me out and said it wasn't really rebellious years,
right,
to dance.
I loved to dance, and when we were all teenagers, it was, who's the best dancer? Who's this? Who can do that? And, you know,
so,
and it was all about jitterbugging.
There was a certain show that was recorded in Philadelphia.
Yes, and I was one of the regulars that would go down to Bandstand.
So the American
and I met
Bandstand.
Dick Clark. I saw him many times.
So when we see some of these black and white old from is it the late 50s, early 60s? When is it? What's
yeah,
the time
59,
frame?
pretty much. 58 and 59.
So one of those blonde girls with a ponytail.
Ponytail was me. And I used to wear a gray, which you wouldn't see because it's all black and white. I used to love my gray, I had a gray skirt with pink dots on it, a polka dot thing. And I just thought I was the living end.
Is that the one that opened, and so when you moved, it kind of
it was we'd have crinolines under there. You know, it was really itchy.
But it looked good.
It looked great, but it itched. So it was about a year and a half that we were just really into that whole scene. And then, we all got jobs, after school, and you couldn't, it kind of waned. But we'd watch it all the time because we knew some of the people. Well, my first job was at General Accident Insurance Company.
Okay.
And after work, I would walk from 5th and Walnut up to Arch Street, and I would go to the Y. And I would swim laps. And I did this for a very good reason. So to avoid the crush on the L, going up to Northeast.
So was this during, were you still in school? Or was this?
Well, actually, I was. I was in what was called work experience. And I was in 12th grade at that time. And I only needed to go to school till 11 o'clock. And then I would leave, and I would go to my job at General Accident. And I got paid, which was a big help. I could help my mother. And back then, I gave my whole check to my mother. Can you imagine kids today? I gave my whole check to her, and she would give me enough money for transportation.
Kind of an allowance.
And a little bit extra. And I learned to sew very well at that time. I made a lot of my clothes. I got very good at making clothes.
Oh, wow.
I made the same outfit. It was a little jacket and a straight skirt, all different flavors. But I always looked okay. And believe it or not, you could buy a blouse at that time for about $5. If you can imagine. So I went back and forth, and, I managed to look nice all the time. And so
now this is leading into
my adulthood.
Real life and adulthood.
So then I would walk from the Walnut up to the Y. And then I would swim, and I was in the 100-mile club. So I had to record how many laps I did every night till I got to 100 miles, and then I got a medal, which I had. I got a medal. In the meantime, I got involved in the gym too. After I swam, I'd go down to the gym, and there was a bunch of young fellows that would play basketball. But I waited for them to finish, because then they would put the rings up in the trampoline, and I got very good at rings and ropes and trampoline, because I was always good in gym. So, well, this guy kept sitting there watching us, and his name was Gene. Well, it ended up, we became good friends, and later I married him. And we got married in the Salvation Army, and in Citadel Corps.
Oh, wow.
And we stayed married for 38 years.
38 years.
And had 3 children.
So three beautiful daughters.
Yes, three daughters. And he decided the grass was greener somewhere else, so that was an interesting development. Many times I've looked at the whole situation, and I've realized it wasn't that horrible for me, because I had done everything. I was the one that did the income tax. Okay. I was the one that did the bills. I was the one that did all the cooking and shopping and so on, and raising of the children. So when this happened, it was an easy
transition.
There was not a lot of tears and carrying on. It just, okay. So of course I had to get a little creative financially, and I decided to put an ad in the paper. So I put an ad in the paper for a roommate. By this time, all of my girls are out and married. And I put an ad in the paper for a roommate. I thought, this will give me the added money that I need to make it. So along came, I had several calls that were really ridiculous. And then I had a call from a young girl who was living in Oxford, and her name was Uni. And she was working at Vanguard. And she said, I'm too far from work. And she was from Mongolia. So she said, I need a place, and I can't spend a lot of money because I'm sending money to a sister in Germany, helping her to live. So we made arrangements to meet on a Saturday, and she came, and we had a cup of tea, and she said, oh, this is so nice, and blah, blah, blah. I said, well, if you want to, you can live here. And we made arrangements at how much she was going to pay, and I made it easy. I didn't want her to spend a lot of money. Well, we were doing fabulous for a couple months, and she came to me and she said, Mrs. Hill, she said, I need to find an apartment. And I said, well, why do you need to find an apartment? She said, well, I love it here, but my brother is coming to get his master's. I said, okay. Well, then a week or so passed, and we were circling apartments, and he couldn't get the visa and so on. This went on for several weeks. So I said, wait a minute, let's get him here. And then the two of you can go look for an apartment. I have a second bedroom, so we'll get him here. Well, sure enough, Enki comes. And Ed. So we put him in the middle room, and he was going back and forth to Wilmington that's where he was going to get his master's. We hardly saw him. I said, Uni, this is working out fine. Let's not. She said, oh, can we stay? I said, we'll just all be a little family here. We can do this. So we pulled off the pink flowered wallpaper, Uni and I, in the middle room, and we painted it blue. Okay. So he finished up his master's. In the meantime, Uni and him go home for Christmas or something. And when they came back, Uni says, oh, I met somebody, I'm going to get married. Okay. So that was going to be somewhere, down the road, another 6 months, 8 months or something. Well, sure enough, along comes Ghana. Ghana had been a heart surgeon in Mongolia.
Wow.
But, of course, his language was really bad. In the meantime...
Well, his English.
His English,
not his language.
Not his language. But he just was not taking to English at all. Where the Ed, his English was, and we worked on it. We had fun with it, but we worked on the English. And so the two of them, they stayed one night. That we had gotten an apartment prior to him coming. And then he stayed one night with us. And then off he went to the apartment. So that left me and Ed in my house. Well, here we are, almost 20 years later, 19 years. In the meantime, Ed bought the house next door because he got a job and so on. And he bought the house next door. Well, tragedy struck my family. My son-in-law in Florida was suffocated under mulch. They had a farm, and my daughter Polly had a 3.5-year-old and a 9-year-old at that time. She stayed there a year and said, "Can I come home?" So they still have the farm. So she came home with the kids, 2 kids and 2 dogs. And at that point, Ed said to me, "You come and live with me." So I went to live with him, and my daughter's living in my house. And of course, we're right next door, twin houses. So it's a lot of back and forth all the time. And it's worked out fine.
It's amazing. Just when you thought everything had fallen apart, and you were left alone.
Right.
God starts to create this new family.
New family.
And then bring back your family.
Exactly.
And so even though you may have thought at that moment that you were alone, God reminded you that you're never alone.
What is the verse? I always forget. It's Jeremiah 23. I'm going to say 11. I know the plans I have for you that will not forsake you, but give you life and hope and so on. And when I looked at this picture of what was going on in my life, how I opened my door to this young girl. Then I opened my door to this young man who was like a son to me. I don't know what I'd do without him now. This was a master plan. Now, here he is, a Buddhist, and he started asking me a lot of questions. And I believe the Lord was making his heart.
And I think it's important to note that
it wasn't
you weren't evangelizing in the sense of accept Jesus. Your life spoke to him.
Right.
Your example spoke to him. So how you were living and what you were doing, what you had been through, and how you were coming through that really spoke to him.
Yeah. And I will say, during this time, I wasn't going to church that much. I went to a Presbyterian. I just couldn't find home. So one day he came to me and he said, and it was in November, I know when it was, November of 07, because I retired in December of 07. That's how I remember it so clearly. He came in one morning and he said, we were having breakfast together. And he said, I just want to tell you, I've accepted Jesus as my Savior. He said, well, I've been praying about it as I went to work. I said, tried to not cry, so I said, to be funny, I said, well, you're not closing your eyes when you go across the bridge, are you? So he said, no, And I said, he said, this makes sense to me. Now I know what it is I need. I didn't know. So this was the beginning of it. In the meantime, we have to go back to 1976.
But before we go there, I wanted you to share a little bit about so your final years in marriage, and how was your happiness level compared to after, and when God starts to help you find this new family? Like, where does your joy and how you feel?
That's the thing.
Where does that come in? How does that?
I look at those years, the years of raising children and and being a very dutiful wife and doing all the things you think you're supposed to do. It was somewhat of a struggle when you don't know. You just don't know what it's like to have more joy in your life, and it's not such a struggle, not worrying about somebody, trying to make somebody happy. I realized you can't make somebody happy.
No.
And I tried all the time. How can I make this person happy? He didn't have a very good childhood. How can I make him happy? Well, when we were still married, I found a part-time job because my kids were still in school. And I got a job I answered an ad in the News of Delaware County, and it was set for a pastor at Lower Merion Baptist Church.
So now we're going back to the 70s now.
Now we're going back to the 70s. I'm still married. And I got this job I went for the interview, and I thought, I really like this guy, and, I know how to run a mimeograph machine. We didn't have computer then.
No, not then.
Okay. So I thought, I can do all that. I know I can do all that. I can answer the phone. I can do that. Well, he called me back the next day and said I had the job. And I would start at $2.50 an hour.
Which is really good.
It was the minimum wage, I think, at the time. Fine. Working 9 to 1. I could get my kids off to school, and I was home before they came home. And I wasn't going to worry about summer at that point. We'll see what happens in the summer. By this time, my oldest girl's 13. She can babysit, Well, there were times, but anyway. So I worked with Pastor Faith. And
what church was this that you went to?
At that time, I was going to Grace Chapel.
And then what's the church you worked at?
Lower Merion Baptist Church. So my kids were not real good with Grace Chapel because it was a very big, lots of kids, fundamental church. And if you didn't go to Christian school, you weren't a Christian.
This is Grace Chapel where?
In Havertown.
In Havertown.
So it was a difficult time for them. But I liked Grace Chapel's Sunday school. There again, they had a good Sunday school program. So what we were doing for a number of years when I worked at Lower Merion Baptist, I would go to Sunday school at Grace Chapel and make my kids go to Sunday school at Grace Chapel. We'd jump in the car and drive to Lower Merion, and we'd go to church at Lower Merion Baptist with Pastor Faith. So,
and this is Reverend Joe Faith. His ministry here was an amazing ministry during
I
the 70s.
I believe he was here
80s.
16 or 17 years.
Yeah, he came in the early 70s, and then he retired in 89, I believe.
Okay.
So it was a good 17, 18 years.
Right. I left, I worked here 7 years. And then my oldest girl was in high school. And I got an opportunity to work at Eastern College. And so I ended up leaving and working full-time in the athletic department at Eastern College. But I still was coming to Lower Merion. And then little by little, I moved away from Lower Merion. Pastor was gone.
But you still kept in touch.
I kept in touch with quite a few people. I had a lot of friends at from Grace Chapel. We had a Tuesday Bible study at Grace Chapel that was for women only, Tuesday Bible study. And I met a lot of women there, and they all went to Grace Chapel. Well, not all of them, because there were other people in that Tuesday Bible study from other churches.
Okay.
It was run by the lady named Pat Kaywood. It was wonderful. It was a wonderful Bible study. So, and it's all women, and it would always end with a luncheon of some sort, and then come September back to the Bible study. But little by little, I started going back to Grace Chapel because now my kids weren't going anywhere. I wasn't involved. And yet I had a hard time there because of some of the things they believed. It was very difficult.
Theology.
Yes, it was very difficult.
They're often very conservative.
Very conservative. And I didn't agree with it. Because you have to remember, I came from the Salvation Army.
Yeah.
We had pastors or officers that were women, that were preachers, and good preachers. Well, here we come to Grace Chapel, and if you have a Sunday school class, for instance, this lady, Pat Kaywood, who was so fabulous, would not be allowed to teach Sunday school in an adult class if there were men in the class. And what a waste.
That's difficult.
What a waste. Because she had all the
gifted.
tools and she was gifted. She, I think, had gone to PCB, Philadelphia College of the Bible. She was and her husband actually was a professor at PCB.
Oh, wow.
And she was gifted and good. But here she sat in the same class with me on a Sunday.
Because there were men in the class.
Because there were men. It was couples class.
And so you were gone from Lower Merion for 20 years, 30 years?
30, probably 30 years.
Because this was, you left in the early 80s?
Yes, in 85.
And then what brought you back to Lower Merion?
Okay. After just not doing anything, not committing to any church at that point, just going up to the chapel once in a while, and the C&E, Christmas and Easter, and where do you go? I started going to a Presbyterian church, Narberth Press, and I liked it.
That's a really good church, actually. A good friend of mine, and she was a professor.
Pastor Weed is the pastor there, or I think he is.
Well, no, now it's Debbie Watson, Reverend Debbie Watson.
Well, Watson was his, did he leave?
I believe so.
Oh, okay.
She's there. I believe she's the senior pastor now.
Oh, okay. Well, she was there, and I used to sit there and think, this is like a Baptist church. I really felt like it was Frankfort Baptist, but bigger, bigger and so on. And I really liked it. And I thought, well, I guess I'll have to be a Presbyterian. My father was a Presbyterian, I guess I can be a Presbyterian. But I was going fairly regularly. But the thing is, I only met 2 or 3 people. One of them had been somebody that I had met at Rosemont Presbyterian Village when I worked there. She used to do a lot of the seniors come in and watch. Okay. And the other lady was from Scotland, and when she heard I gravitated to this lady. That Scot came out of me. So
and your accent came out too, right?
Yeah. She has a heavy accent. Well, then when Eggy made this announcement, he went with me to Grace. He didn't like Grace Chapel. Okay. Then we went to Narberth, and he was okay with that one, I think. And I said, all right, we're going to go. I want to take you to a church that I used to go to, Lower Merion Baptist. So I brought him here, and I don't know who the pastor was. I guess the one before you.
Well, what year was this? Around?
Well, let's see, 7, 8. It would probably be 2008.
So that would be the transition between Reverend Jonathan Malone, and Reverend Tim Dalton. So I think it was in that time frame that Jonathan left.
And I don't know who.
Tim
I don't know. Whoever it was had children.
Well, they both did.
No, okay. Well, anyway, we came the one Sunday, and I sat in the back with him, and I thought, whoa, there's not many people here compared to what it used to be. And I said, boy, this is really, but Pat and Ron, I saw Pat and Ron, of course.
No problem, Pat.
And who else came up to me at the time? I can't remember. But, Mary.
Mary Punchin?
No, Mary Lawrence.
Mary Lawrence.
Was here.
Yes.
And Mary did. So I thought, oh, wow. And then we went back to the Presbyterian church a couple times. And then my daughter Allison was going to get married.
But this is jumping ahead about 10 years at that point.
Yeah. So I had come with my granddaughter one Easter. We had gone to you could never park at that Presbyterian church. So Mackenzie wanted to go to church on Easter.
And this is in 2017.
It had to be, yeah. So Mackenzie wanted to go to church on Easter. And I wanted her to go to church because I've worked on Mackenzie many times. So we went to the Presbyterian. You couldn't find a parking place. So I said, that's it. So we drove from Narberth to Lower Merion Baptist. I said, I know I can park there, and you're going to go to church. So we came in, and there was not as many people as I thought, but it wasn't as bad as the last time. So we came in and we sat down, and here's this pastor in a robe, and I thought, oh, this is not Pastor Faith's church, this pastor. So we sat there, and it seemed we did all the same hymns. It was great. And then this pastor spoke, and I thought, he's really good. It's just different. It's not like Pastor Faith. So we left. I guess I shook your hand. You probably don't even remember me. But we left, and I was kind of impressed. So when I got home, I said to Ed, I want to go back there. He said, well, we can go back. Well, then things started progressing, and Allison was going to get married. And Allison said to me, Mom, I want to get married with a pastor, and nobody wants to marry us. I said, what do you mean nobody wants to marry you? They had called several places, and the person she was marrying, Tom, was Catholic, but he was divorced. She was divorced. And I said, well, I'm going to tell you, call this number, was Lower Merion Baptist. I said, and talk to this pastor. I want you to talk to this pastor. So she did, and you talked to her. So you performed her ceremony.
Yes.
And and came to the dinner.
Yes, and that guy sat with you.
And we sat together, you and Ed, and I think the girls, Mackenzie, and I'm still working on Mackenzie.
That's okay.
But they were all there, and Polly was there, and they said, let's go to Lower Merion Baptist. Then following. So James, when we were driving here, James says, do you think he'll remember us? I said, of course he's going to remember us. How could he forget us? But that was the week after, or 2 weeks after, maybe. So that was how I got back, and I've come back ever since.
Yes. And
so I found my home here at Lower Merion Baptist.
And it's been a blessing to have you and the family back, and we keep praying for you and for the family, and I appreciate
keep us all in your prayers.
Definitely, I appreciate
and pray for Mackenzie, because she's still out there.
Definitely.
And she knows the story, so I
think that all the seeds that have been planted grow in their due time.
Right.
And all of the seeds that you've planted in your family, some have grown and some are still being watered, but they will all bear fruit.
I think so. I do. We have Piper out there. She's going to be starting her second year at University of Pittsburgh. And I've got 3 other ones that are all coming along, and who knows what's going to happen in that department.
But I think you've done a good job.
That happened.
I think that your example and your persistence and your prayer, I think that you've seen the quality of them. You've seen it in Ed, you've seen it in your daughters, and you've seen it in your granddaughters, and all those seeds God is watering and fertilizing, and soon they'll grow.
I have faith that they will. They will.
And so I appreciate you. Thank you so much.
Yeah, well, thank you.
For your shared stories. Thank you for being here.
Okay.
You and Ed, and I hope maybe I can get Ed to sit with me.
Well, that would be a really good story.
I would love to have him sit here with me and just share his story and testimony, because God is doing a lot. And I think even though we are a small church, even though we have this great history, God is building from within. And I think we've had people who have returned, like yourself, who after a long period of time have returned and are helping us to rebuild that foundation. And I think that all of the seeds and everything that we're doing in ministry and everything that we're doing with people, soon those seeds will grow and bear fruit. So I have faith And God is teaching me patience. It's been a slow process, but it's been a slow, intentional process. And I think that you are a marker of that process, of that progress. You have helped me and encouraged me, and it's always good to sit with you and hear your stories. And I'm sure that if we sat again, you can give me a whole set of other stories.
Probably.
But thank you. Thank you for being here with me. Would you pray with me?
Sure.
Lord, I thank you for this day and for this time. I thank you for this opportunity to sit with Miss Jessy. I thank you for the blessing that she has been to me and to this church, Lord. I pray now, Lord, that you would take all of her petitions into your hands. You see her heart and her mind and her hopes and dreams. And I pray, Lord, that you would take them and allow the seeds that she's planted to start to grow and show and bear some fruit, Lord, just to keep her encouraged and to help her know that all that has happened and all that is happening have been in your hands. I thank you for the joy that she brings and for the encouragement that she brings with her. Lord, I pray that you continue to be her light and you shine before her so that she can walk the path you have called her to. We give you all honor and all praise, and I pray this in Jesus' name. Amen. I thank you all for joining me and for joining us, and I thank Miss Jessy for being here. So stay tuned, and hopefully we will see you all soon. Blessings.